Hey Adam, so we're entering a really busy time of year. Lots of employees are doing overtime with things like Black Friday and a lot of these other things that are happening. By the way, I do have an injury from my bike. You can see, so
Hope
just
you're okay.
just so you know, you don't think that I'm like weird. He just put tape on his face. But anyway, as these employees are really closing out the end of the year, what are some things as an employer that you should be thinking about in terms of overtime, these kinds of things?
Yeah, I think you can take this question a couple ways. Let's start with the law and the requirements to pay all employees overtime. People always lose sight of the fact that there's three basic requirements for every business when it comes to wage and hour. One is record keeping, two is minimum wage, three is overtime, and those rules apply to all employees unless they fall within a legally recognized exemption, which I always say, if you want to seek an exception from that rule, make sure you consult with someone like me first so that you're properly relying on that exception. Otherwise, you have to pay everybody at least minimum wage every single hour they work. Okay. And that's based on local law. Okay. The local minimum wage, which tends to go up each year. So keep an eye out for that as we come into the new year. And then also, if employees work over 40 hours a week, with things like Black Friday and Cyber Monday and some of these busy retail days, there will be a lot of retail based employees that will be putting in those extra hours and will be earning overtime if they work in excess of 40 hours. So the requirement for employers is to pay them time and a half for every hour over 40. That's at a federal level. And then in certain states, there's also a daily overtime requirement. This is in California, Colorado. I believe those are the only two states right now. Florida doesn't have this as a requirement. But if you have employees that work in one of these states that has a daily overtime requirement, that's another thing to be thinking about, because then you'll want to, if you're looking to avoid that obligation, then you need to make sure that your scheduling is done properly to go beneath the requirements of a daily overtime obligation, which is also time and a half. So those are some things to think about from a legal perspective, from a practical perspective as well. Some people tend to take their foot off the gas pedal this time of year. Understandably so. There's holidays and joyful times, and people take time off from work. And I encourage that when I work with business owners. Make sure you give your employees plenty of time off. But that's not to say when employees are working that they should not be present, that they should not be motivated. And there are ways that you can keep them motivated, and you should do that. So what I recommend in this regard is to focus on incentives. And those incentives could be overtime. Hey, we're going to pay you time and a half, even on instances when maybe we legally do not have to. For example, if an employee is working during a holiday, we talked about this in a prior video. Legally, you don't have to pay extra for that. But that's something that employers could do to incentivize productivity during this time of year when a lot of employees are taking their foot off the gas pedal. Other incentives that you can think about as well, but the key is make sure you follow the law, number one, and number two, think about how you can keep your employees motivated and focused so they can remain productive.